Do you know that British colonizers killed over 11,000 Kenyan freedom fighters? Yes, the Mau Mau freedom fighters. And even that number is only the official record. Survivors insist the deaths were far higher, because countless civilians were caught in the violence. Let me take you back to the early 1900s. When Britain claimed Kenya, they didn't just rule it, they took it. The most fertile farmland in the country was seized and renamed the White Highlands. But this was not just a name, it was law. Africans, especially the Kikuyu people, who had lived on those lands for centuries, were forced off their own soil. Entire communities were driven into overcrowded, dry, and unproductive reserves. And then came the taxes: the hut tax, the poll tax, the labor tax. Britain designed these taxes in a way Africans could only pay by working for the settlers. It was a system of wage slavery. You had to work on their plantations, on their railways, on their farms. Not because you wanted to, but because survival demanded it. Movement itself was tightly controlled. Africans needed passes to leave their reserves. And even when they worked, their wages were set so low that poverty and dependency became permanent. This was not about civilization. It was about extracting cheap labor for Britain's empire. By the 1940s, the people had had enough. Political groups like the Kikuyu Central Association began to rise, demanding land and rights. But the British response was arrests, intimidation, and silence. And out of this frustration, the Mau Mau movement was born. In 1952, the Mau Mau rebellion erupted. These fighters, many from the Kikuyu, Embu, and Meru communities, swore secret oaths to fight until their land was returned. Their slogan was simple: land and freedom. But how did Britain respond? With overwhelming violence. Villages were burned, communities were rounded up and placed into barbed wire detention camps. Inside those camps, there was no humanity, only torture, starvation, and humiliation. People were beaten, women were assaulted, men were hanged after sham trials. Even children were not spared the brutality of colonial punishment. Britain claims that 11,000 Mau Mau fighters were killed. But Kenyan survivors say the truth is much darker. Tens of thousands of civilians also perished in the violence, starvation, and disease inside those camps. And here is what makes it worse. For decades, Britain denied it all. In schools, they erased the story. In books, they called the Mau Mau terrorists, while praising so-called loyal Africans. The torture camps were airbrushed out of history, as if they never existed. It was not until survivors took the British government to court in the 2000s that the truth began to surface. Evidence long hidden in secret archives came to light. And in 2013, after years of denial, the UK government finally admitted what had happened. They expressed regret and paid $19.9 million in compensation to just over 5,000 survivors. But listen carefully, Britain still called it an isolated incident. They refused to acknowledge it for what it truly was: a brutal colonial system built on violence, land theft, and forced labor. The Mau Mau rebellion was crushed militarily, but its spirit could not be killed. It shook the empire. It exposed the lie of British civilization. And it became the turning point that led to Kenya's independence in 1963, with Jomo Kenyatta, once accused of leading the Mau Mau, becoming the nation's first president. Yet even after independence, the scars remained. Land redistribution was unequal, poverty remained widespread, and the shadow of colonial rule still hangs heavy over Kenya's history. So when we speak of the Mau Mau, let us speak with respect. They were not terrorists. They were freedom fighters, were men and women who refused to submit to colonial slavery, and their blood paid the price for Kenya's independence. To this day, Britain has never fully acknowledged the extent of its crimes in Africa. But history remembers, and the people remember, because the struggle for land, dignity, and freedom is never forgotten.